my honor and pleasure to be here with a longtime teacher and mentor of mine, Rabbi Schwarz, who is a social entrepreneur, an author, an educator, and doing a lot of work right now to train rabbis and to help build meaningful, intentional, spiritual communities. So thank you for taking this time to talk.
My pleasure, Shmuly.
So I thought we could talk a little bit about this phenomenon of spiritual but not religious. So to begin, everyone talks about this category, but I think few understand who they are. Who in your work have you identified as the primary residents of this phenomenon?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a category that's helpful. There's actually, in the literature, you now have people actually write SBNRs as a shorthand because it has kind of captured the imagination, and it's a good descriptor of a large phenomenon. But as with most descriptors, unless you get into the weeds, you're in danger of overgeneralization. It's not one category, and it's not a movement either. Okay, part of the work that we're doing now in this initiative that I've started called K'nisa, Communities of Meaning Network, and I should say for your listeners that K'nisa is the Hebrew word for an entranceway, or what I like to call a portal, Portal, because we're noticing that these new emerging communities of meaning are entrance ramps into Jewish life for a lot of people who would otherwise not walk through the door at all. So that's why we call it K'nisa.
Nice.
So we've identified is different pockets of energy happening among mostly millennials, but not exclusively millennials. That's also very important. We think sometimes this is only a millennial phenomenon, who are exploring and redefining what Jewish identity means to them, not in terms that have been created by the institutions that make up the organized Jewish community, but on their own terms, which is totally typical of this millennial generation. And those sectors are six we've identified very specifically: social justice, eco-sustainability, and what's been called the food movement, Jewish learning, of which Valley Beit Midrash is a perfect example, independent minyanim, arts and culture, and spiritual practice. Those are the six areas. And they're very diverse. They're very different. In fact, when we gather each year, we identify about 50 individuals, mostly entrepreneurs, who are creating new models of Jewish identification in one of those sectors. We bring them together for a retreat, for like a deep dive to become part of the K'nisa network. And the phenomenon is so interesting. They might recognize 2 or 3 other people in their own sector, but when they look at the people in the other sector, they have no clue who they are, nor do they know why they're in the room with them. In my mind, they have a lot in common. That's why we've called them communities of meaning. Now, why communities of meaning? Initially, we were using the term spiritual community, but what we learned after our first year, we got the pushback, that a significant number of them, not all, but about a third, said, we don't resonate to the term spiritual. That's your term, not our term.
Right.
And so communities of meaning became a more generic umbrella for the phenomenon, which I think is a good descriptor now. So back to your first questions, who are they? You got to ask, who are they in the food movement? Who are they in the social justice movement? And what do they have? Who are they in arts and culture? What do they have in common, and in what ways are they different? We're starting to explore that a little bit now.
Right. So do you think this is a positive development, that this is an expanding group, or just the reality that we need to adapt to?
All right, I want to address that, but I need to take a step back and say the following. One of my biggest surprises, we're now entering into year 4 of K'nisa as a national project, which is designed to identify, convene, and build capacity in this growing network of communities of meaning. Okay, and we are doing, by the way, a national mapping project, because when I published my book, Jewish Megatrends, which came out in 2013, I had identified maybe a dozen, give or take, 12 to 15 or so such organizations. And when the book came out, I would talk to some people who were in major positions of leadership in the Jewish community, and they would say, interesting analysis, Sid, but the fact of the matter is, how many groups are there out there? Like a dozen? It's like a fringe phenomenon. And I was persuaded, although I couldn't name more than that at the time, I was persuaded it was in no way a fringe phenomenon. So now in our national mapping project, we're well over 200 organizations in the country, and nobody knows what the limit is to that, because we're still finding more and more groups every day. Okay. Now, my big surprise in this mapping project, as we've tried to identify, is that I expected that a lot of these leaders of new communities of meaning were going to be the nuns. You've heard about that? So the nuns are those who don't identify with any religion whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I was wrong about that.
Right.
Turns out that the leaders are actually all B'nai Bayit. They all are young people who grew up in our Jewish communal house, went to our day schools, to our summer camps, to our trips to Israel.
Yeah.
However, when they reach maturity, when they hit their 20s, and they start making their own decisions to be, who am I as a young adult? That is not my mother, not my father, not what my rabbi had in mind for me, whatever else, okay? Or my drich for my summer trip to Israel, right? Who am I going to be? They start to kind of redefine the categories. Now, here's what's important, and this gets the key to the question. The people that they're attracting are the nuns. So, in other words, these young people who are the B'nai Bayit, coming out of our community,
are the connectors.
Are the connectors. Yeah. But they are deeply ambivalent about the thing we call Jewish community.
Right.
When you and I say Jewish community, we think mom and apple pie.
Right.
This is a good thing. It's connected. Why not?
Right.
Well, a lot of young people are saying, it's a good thing? That's your opinion.
Right.
To them, the jury is out.
Right.
And there are many things that are off-putting to them about the Jewish community that are compelling. I would say that these leaders are available to be connectors, but they come in with some healthy skepticism, which we, by the way, the community, those of us who are the leaders in the community, we've earned the skepticism.
So what do you identify as those biggest barriers? Barriers might not even be the right word, towards Jewish communal life, primarily engagement with establishments. Meaning when this population that we're discussing looks at JCCs and federations and synagogues and Israel engagement organizations, what would you identify as the top 3 or top 5 markers of what alienates them from engagement?
Okay. Want to hand me that book right there? I'll give you just one quick example. This is from a study that we did of the first year. Because, as we know, American Jews have never been ideological. Unlike Israelis or European Jews, Americans aren't into ideology, theory, whatever else. Most Americans don't even read books, unfortunately.
0.6 a year. 0.6 books a year. Yeah.
That's pretty bad. Worse than I thought.
You and I are pushing up the trends a little bit.
We try. So how do people decide whether they're going to kind of walk in the door of a Jewish institution? Let's talk synagogues. I can talk about other institutions as well. But let's just start with synagogues for a second, okay? People are reacting to a chush, a feel. How do it feel like? They're not analyzing the rabbi's sermon. They're saying, what did it feel like for the hour or two they spent there, if you count the Kiddush as well, which, by the way, may be the most important time
for sure.
in the time that they're not
Torah reading.
Not the Torah reading or the Birkat HaShach or Musaf, right? Okay. Now, to answer your question, we asked a question of the people in our first cohort of Knesset, what things are they most looking for when they decide to connect, not join, but connect in some way, spend their time and some of their money in a Jewish organization. Here are the words that came out. They're looking for organizations that are transformative, welcoming, non-judgmental, pluralistic, and accessible. Those are the first 5 things by percentage. Now, if you ask a question of people who actually go around and go to synagogues and JCCs and federations and events, whatever else, they're unlikely to mention any of those words.
Right.
This is like it's the bizarro world from Superman, right? It's the opposite of the universe that we created in the Jewish community.
Right.
So first and foremost, it's about feel. Well, what is the affect? And I think our institutions have a long way to go to create that. But these new emerging communities of meaning are doing that. Add to it, there's some very tangible issues, okay? This generation, even though, and maybe it even comes from young people who themselves have been raised with privilege and some affluence, the fact that our community is so driven by money and people with money is off-putting to them, okay?
Right.
That's, big point 1.
Right.
Big point number 2, the Israel boogeyman has become now what was once, when I was younger, was one of the most unifying, or the most unifying factor in Jewish life. Yeah. Everyone could rally around that. Today it is the single most divisive element. Right. Now, wherever you are on the spectrum on Israel advocacy, Israel is the best thing that's ever happened to the world, it's always right, and the Palestinians are always wrong, or you have suspicions about whether Israel is doing the right thing and its conduct of foreign policy or handling its Arab population, whatever else. Wherever you're on that spectrum, the fact that the Jewish community has made a litmus test that you have to have a certain loyalty level to be kosher, to be even in the community.
Yeah.
And by the way, even let's talk about the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction movement. I'm in no way sympathetic with the BDS movement, but I think the community has totally misplayed its hand there by essentially demonizing BDS Jews. It simply has reinforced the notion of Jews who are not going to go to BDS, but are aware of the phenomenon, saying like, what do you mean you're not allowed to believe X, Y, or Z? Since when are there loyalty oaths to be part of the Jewish community? So simply the fact that it's a loyalty oath is off-putting, number two, right? And the third piece is that the Jewish community has worked with the same definition of what is a good Jew for more than 50 years.
Right.
And it's outdated.
Right.
So what do we measure? You know, the sociologists, God bless them, we're very well-studied population, okay? Right. So they want to count, do you give to Federation? Have you visited Israel? Are you a member of a synagogue? Or how many Jewish organizations are you a part of? These are the markers.
High holidays.
High holidays, right. And it's not the way that these young people want to be judged.
Right.
Because frankly, I'm meeting young Jews who would say no to all five of those criteria and are deeply involved in Jewish life.
Right.
And there's no way that the organized Jewish community can understand that phenomenon.
Yeah. So I want to push back against the phenomenon for a moment, but I wanted to differentiate that with blaming, because I think what we see a lot in Jewish institutional life is blaming the customer. Oh, it's their fault. They don't appreciate what we have. And I think that's not very productive. But my concern, maybe not push back even as much as air a concern, and maybe I'm a little old school in my thinking, which is that I think that I like marriage over dating. You know, I think there's something to commitment, and the way I understand religion is the commitment of spirituality. Religion is what we call building a community around covenant and caring for one another and showing up for one another, even when you don't always feel like it. Even when it might not feel like all those wonderful things. And I also feel that the way I understand Judaism as a religion is that we have content. And I mean religion in the most pluralistic sense. But we have content, which can be interpreted in lots of different ways, engaged with in lots of different ways. But that as soon as we move away from that content into something that meets all those categories but doesn't have content, I worry that if what we're doing, I don't want to say will sustain us, because my primary concern is not survival, but is actually thriving through our content. I worry that we're actually able to thrive without that engagement. So will we inevitably have to go towards watered down models there's no barrier to entry, and that's why it's so welcoming? Or is there a way to have rich spirituality, to have rich engagement with Jewish ideas, and still achieve all of those goals as well? And do we see models of like that being created?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So when you mention covenant, you're in my wheelhouse, because I'm a big believer in how we build covenantal community. I believe that one of the mistakes that synagogues have made is that they've become transactional institutions where there's no commitment.
Right.
So
you commit through paying your dues.
Right. And in the 10, 15, 20 years that people might be members when their kids are going through the religious school, nothing affects the family. Right. They simply are paying a fee for a set of goods and services, right? So I'm all about covenantal community. However, where we may differ, because and I think you've asked a good, important question, is that there's an expression that you know well of people who return to Judaism that are called Baal Tshuva, okay? Or Baal Tshuva, people who come back. And it means the bearer of answers. They found the truth. That's what it really means. A Baal Tshuva is someone who found the truth, and then they've come back, okay? And we're a community that actually has to cultivate more Baalei Shelah. In other words, we have to validate, legitimize that. Ask a good question, and that's what gets you in the door.
Right.
Not coming with an answer.
Right.
Because we're in a time where I don't have the answers.
Right.
Maybe you do, but I don't, okay?
I certainly don't,
If I can get Jews to a point where they feel that they can ask any question, nothing's off the table, okay? Is Torah valuable or not? Does God exist or not, okay? is my obligation to Jews the same as it is to non-Jews or not? I mean, these are really good questions. I want to live with those questions. I want to be intentional about it, and I want to have in my room people who don't agree about the answers. That is the most vital kind of community. And I think once you get to that level, then you can start talking about covenantal community, because I was privileged to start a synagogue in Bethesda, Maryland, where I'm still quite involved, at Dot Shalom in Bethesda. And what we found is we attracted a very high percentage of people who would be called in the literature seekers. And Jews are among the most avid religious, spiritual seekers in America today. But they tend not to go to synagogues, because synagogues are places that says, here's our program, and here are our answers, and come on. And if they don't get enough, they take out a bigger ad, and then a bigger ad, okay? That's not how it works. We invited people in who had questions, okay? And the more good questions that came, and the more challenging it was for me, the richer the conversation became. And people came to feel that they were, for the first time in their lives, in a Jewish space where any question was okay. There was nothing off limits. And there was no prescribed answers to them either. One of the phrases that I use, and I use this a lot with the rabbis I train throughout all the movements, is that I think what we want to go for, and this gets directly to your question, is low threshold, high expectation. What I mean by that is to come into our doors, whether it's just to attend something or to join. Okay? I don't want to make that decision, you will. Okay? There's no prerequisite. You don't have to take Judaism 101 or 201. You don't have to like wear tzitzis or put on a kippah or say you believe in God or say you like the current government of the state of Israel. There are no prerequisites. Come in the door, low threshold. High expectations is that we are not producing Jewish light. We were very clear about that, okay? And I take a lot of pride in the fact that as Adat Shalom got off the ground in the late 80s, we started out as a Shabbat morning community. Initially, my people said, no one's going to come Shabbat morning. We have things to do. I said, well, if you like this community, that's when we're going to get together. And we built a Shabbat culture so that we probably have, even to today, among the highest per capita attendance on Shabbat morning of any synagogue in the area of all denominations, because we created an expectation that if you were part of the community, you would be there. Okay? So I think low threshold, high expectation is what we're going for, and that's how you get closer to this covenantal community. It's not by starting with the bar saying, like, sign on to this. That's the Vatican. The Vatican's got these, list of dogma, creed that you sign on to, and then you're a good Catholic.
Okay, so my last question for you is, do you think there's something very serious to salvage out of Jewish establishment life today, and that can be transformed there, organizationally and culturally? Or do you think the future is really in this social entrepreneurial space, this alternative, intentional community building space?
Right. So I think there's a lot. I mean, I've now spent as much time working with established synagogues and rabbis who are in pulpits as I am with these emerging communities of meaning. Now, why is that? Because I think I want to invest in both places. Okay, I read early on in the stock market trying to diversify, so I'm trying to diversify here. But it's not just an investment philosophy. I think both sides need each other, and actually I believe. Not that I know exactly how to do it yet, but I think about this every day. That there is a shidduch made in heaven, a match made in heaven between these two sectors. Why? Because we've done enough work now with these emerging innovative models of groups that have emerged since the year 2000. That's been our arbitrary starting point, okay? That they are characterized by the fact that they are seriously under-resourced, and they're mostly organizationally immature, by which I mean the people who lead them have beautiful hearts and big ideas, but without the know-how of how do you take an organization from ideation to sustainability. The percentage of failure there is probably higher than in the private sector, okay, in the nonprofit realm. Well, look at the Jewish community, okay? It actually has the two assets that are most missing in the innovation sector. We have in the organized community in spades. It's well-resourced, there's a lot of money there, and there's a lot of organizational maturity. What's interesting to me is the possibility, what would it look like to bring some of these innovative groups that are able to attract the very population that the legacy organizations cannot attract, and actually create a partnership between the two so that the legacy organization starts to expand its notion about how to do Jewish. And the upstart organization, the social entrepreneurship venture, let's get some shelf space in the Jewish community. Like, in other words, as opposed to, living in the cloud,
Right.
which is where a lot of them live,
Yeah.
a website in a cloud,
Right.
they are actually have an address in the Jewish community that's recognized by Jews.
Right.
I'm not a digital native because of my age, right? But I do think that in the community there's a sense that if you don't have a place, a makom, which of course means not just place but also is a euphemism for God, something special is happening there. There's a notion that if you don't have a place, you're not real. So I think that there's something to be had there. I don't want to I think we have so much value in the organizations that are out there.
Yeah.
And I also notice one of the things that is not getting enough attention right now that needs attention is that there's a lot of entrepreneurship happening now in legacy organizations. And just because they were established in 1910 doesn't mean they don't have any innovative ideas.
Right.
And I think a lot of these legacy institutions are incubating some very innovative things and are not being recognized appropriately for those people who care about the new shiny thing.
Yeah. Wonderful. So it's an exciting time and lots of opportunity. And if you want to learn more about Rabbi Sid's books or his organizations that you can plug into, look below on the bottom of the YouTube and you can plug in there. Thank you so much. Keep up the amazing work. Thank you so much.